Good afternoon, evening, or whatever time of day it is, wherever you folks may be. It is time for another of our sessions of the Content Artist or Artist Development Series here from CGBytes. I am Les Garner from 6S1 Media, here to guide you through the wonderful world of all things Dash Studio related, creative, making stuff, yada yada yada, all that fun stuff. So, here we are. We're actually about a minute and a half early, and that's fine. We're just going to jump right into this thing. I'm in a really great mood today. Have some really cool stuff going on in my little world that I kind of mentioned in the run-up before all this. Not going to get into that right now, but it's really cool things. So I'm in an excellent top-tier mood for the day. Let's have some fun. All right. So first off, we're going to kick off the day announcing, and I see that one of my illustrious compatriots has already posted this in the chat, which is awesome sauce. We're going to be giving away 2 freebies today. 2, not 1, but dos freebies, por favor. And these freebies go along with what we're kicking off in this series. Okay, we're starting a new series today. Yay, new series, woo! Starting a new series today called Alien Allure. I know, voices and all that stuff. So, what I wanted to deal with in this series is something that I see has a great deal of popularity market-wise, and that is this idea of kind of sexy or alluring sort of alien concepts, things that take sort of the human form and push it into places that are obviously unnatural, very science fiction, fantasy, but have this sense of almost a heightened sexuality to them. They have a well, I mean, they're alluring. They're meant to play to the most attractive parts or things that are they heighten attractiveness. They take ideas of things that are attractive and kind of expand on them. Maybe even heighten them or build them into something in a design sense that actually takes what is attractive and pushes it into other realms aesthetically. It's an odd sort of thing, and I find it kind of fascinating that this is something people really love. It's a very popular sort of subject. You can actually have a lot of fun with it. There's a lot of creativity to be had going into this sort of area of design, working with, like I said, these kind of alien ideas and trying to do aliens that are attractive. My personal aesthetic, where I tend to fall artistically, I'm a monster guy. I like doing, just like left to my own devices, most of the time I'm going to create things that are not necessarily sexy, or if you find the things I create sexy, you might have something wrong with your brain. Like my wife. She likes some of the stuff that I make. And I'm like, huh? This thing will eat you. She's like, uh-huh. So I tend to be more of a visceral, over-the-top, grrr kind of scary monster sort of creator. But there's definitely an interesting place to go with the idea of the sort of sexy, alluring, captivating alien. So I wanted to start off actually not really doing a whole lot in 3D exactly at the moment. We're going to eventually in the course of today's session. But I really just wanted to go through and look at some different designs that I really liked as I kind of gathered my thoughts on what we would put together in the freebies and use as an example to build in the course of this series. So I wanted to take a moment and let's think about the idea of creating some kind of a sexy, alluring alien. So there are different things to consider in the human form that are things that create a feminine kind of sexiness. A lot of that comes from just the basic shape, but then there are lines and forms that if we accent them and heighten them in our design and in our concept process, we can really add to that sense of attractiveness. So here was a nice character sheet that I found, and I really encourage going and looking up traditional art, traditional concept art, and sheets like this, because this stuff really gives you a look into kind of the production end of some of the kinds of things that I deal with outside of the content market. So outside of this, and I think I've mentioned it before to you guys, I work in film and gaming on a fairly regular basis. And in those worlds, a lot of times, we're going to work with traditional concept art. Sometimes that's actually what I do. There are times when I get pulled in on things just to do concept art and to do traditional drawing that, sometimes I'm told flat out, don't even use the computer, just draw. Okay, that's fine. So this is some of the kind of stuff that I would do in that. And in past series, we've gone through a bit of my concepting process. So you guys have seen some of that from me. And here I've picked out one piece that's a nice mock-up of some alien concepts. Of course, this has a lot of clothing involved in it, but still, it has a lot of lines. There are shapes that you can pay attention to here that really can help inform some of your own choices in creating a new design. I also wanted to compare this with maybe some other concepts. Like I really liked this, which I think this may actually be from Mass Effect, which is a great game with some really cool alien designs. Of course, here, this isn't exactly sexy because you have all the armor and things on it. You have all that stuff in place, but it still has this kind of attractiveness that comes from the lines. So this one makes for a great example of how that stuff relates into the face. And what we can find with that is this kind of flow. There's a real flowing nature, and I'll do my little screen cappy thing here that I like doing. So if we take a look, you'll see that we have these lines, and then the thrust of those lines are reinforced. And it's an interesting psychological thing how those forward arcing downward lines play into our design throughout a character, and even through piles and piles of hard surfaces and armor and things like that, still convey a sense of femininity. So, in my opinion, the heart of a feminine design and the heart of a sexy design is this shape right here. It's this V shape. And lines at the top, thrusting down, force your eyes down. So these lines actually drive your eyes to look down at the bosom, torso area. And then the lines from the legs drive your eyes up into the torso area. And so there's something about those kind of lines at the top and bottom of a design that actually guides our eyes in to see parts. They actually drives your eyes in a very primal, animalistic sort of way. Your eyes get driven to look at the more animalistic parts. It's also interesting to me that the female form naturally gravitates toward those kind of lines, whereas the male form is boxier, and from an aesthetic view, the male form doesn't lend itself to those kind of lines. And in fact, if you take a male character and you start focusing on those kind of lines and design concepts, you're going to turn it feminine every single time, because that's how our brains are wired to see these things. We recognize these kind of cues. And so it's really strange. There's a lot of psychology that can play into that, and I would encourage anyone to take some time and go look into those things and just look into elements of visual psychology, because it plays into storytelling, plays into character creation. There's a lot of little things you can find in that the way that plays out in what you'll create actually relates directly to what you might choose to create to sell. Because it's, everybody knows the old statement that sex sells, and or things that are sexual or sexually intriguing will tend to sell. And I think that's part of the drive inside our market to do those kind of characters, is that sex sells. So if we want to do an alien, let's do a sexy alien, because, oh, look, I got to do an alien and it's sexy, so it sells. But in the course of that, there's actually a lot of interesting room for some cool art and something that's more than just tapping that component of the market. You can actually apply those kind of design concepts and create something really cool that also does that job of tapping that particular paradigm and becoming a product that works on many levels. And that's one of the things that I hope people kind of take away from some of the stuff that I teach, is that I want you to be able to make those kind of decisions and do those sorts of things that do play to whatever the propensity of a market is, but at the same time, to be able to make it cool, make it good art, make it creative and inventive and new and fresh. A big complaint that I have looking at the overall market of 3D content, and a conversation that I have had pretty frequently now for a while with folks behind the scenes in this market, is how there's a lot of folks creating things that are kind of samey looking, kind of derivative looking. There's a lot of pretty white chick pieces getting sold, getting uploaded to stores all over the place, and that's fine. I mean, you can do those kinds of characters, but there's a lot of them. So to do those things and be successful with them means you have to be incredibly good first off with them. They have to be perfect. And they also kind of need to have a twist on them somewhere along the way. Like Jason has done a couple characters recently that were released at CGBytes, and I'm going to give props to Jason while I'm on here. The character kits that he did don't look like all those samey sort of character kits that I see from people sometimes. They're much more unique. They have a realism to them. They have hints of asymmetry. There are little details, little attentions he's given to them that set them apart, make them unique. And I think that's a really cool thing. That applies to your kind of standardized sort of human characters. What we're looking at here, though, is how do we do the inventive stuff? How do we do something really creative that's not human? Something that's just imaginative and otherworldly, and give it some sense of allure and sexuality and some kind of attractiveness that still taps that market while bringing, a different kind of design to the table. So let's close this and go back over and keep looking through some of the other samples that I put together. This is a sample actually from a friend of mine, a guy named Pascal Blanche, who used to be art director for EA, and he does a lot of these alien pieces that are super cool. And here we see something that in the design for the piece we're giving away today as a freebie, something that I think I borrowed subconsciously without even really thinking about it, but is this idea of kind of this nose removal and things that play with the lines of the face and smoothing those lines down into something that is even more aquiline and points forward, points down into the rest of the body. So here you can see that in his work, he's kept the body very humanoid. The fingers maybe are a little on the elongated side, and he's focused mostly on just the head and adding things off the head, which is a totally fine concept to do, especially if you want to keep that air of sexuality, that air of human familiarity in the body that allows those sorts of things to really work. So this is another one that kind of goes the complete opposite direction. I actually found this design really interesting. I like the elongated legs, and elongated legs are something that play to a sense of sexuality. It plays to that alluring nature. And then here you see again, we have that thrust in the face. So this takes that whole concept, though, and all those lines and that kind of form language that I was discussing, and applies it to something inherently aggressive. So you have these sleek, very attractive lines that all lead to something that will eat you. I really dig that. I think that's a very cool thing, and that's something to kind of, let's put a pin in that and think about that later, because that's got a lot of value, and it offers some interesting ideas that you can play with. So this is something really along the lines of I think the character's name was Lama Su from Star Wars, and I really dig this sort of thing. This is more in the range of what I'm going for with our Alien Allure kit that we're giving away today. Here you have the elongated form. The human form has been stretched. So we've taken this idea of almost a supermodel type body and just pulled it vertically. So you get this even longer, lankier, very slender and soft kind of approach, where that body doesn't feel like a body that really has a lot of weight to it. It's almost fragile looking. And there's something very attractive about fragility in form. There's some really strange psychology behind it at times, but fragility in form combined with length and flowing lines almost always screams feminine form language. And it's a great thing to work into your stuff if you want to sort of tap that that interest people have in using the female form in art. This is kind of another take. It's almost the same sort of species in a way, but something that brings it back down into more of a humanoid shape. And the thing that I really wanted to kind of use this particular sample for, was kind of like on this. We see, again, we have those thrusting lines that all point in those directions, like I illustrated. And so even through all this costuming and armor, we still have a very strong female form that still has a very attractive sort of shape to it. This is obviously a cartoony concept for perhaps a more aggressive yet still very attractive kind of alien idea. But even in a cartoony form, we have the elongation of the limbs, we have the thinning of the torso, we have all of these things that guide the eye in these lines. And I know I could probably talk about this kind of stuff for a long time without even getting into techniques, but the thing is, the techniques you learn are, to me, secondary. The first thought should be always design. Design is so much more important than technique, because techniques can be learned. Techniques, you can find books, you can find all kinds of things on technique. But what I'm talking about here, at least in the first chunk of today's session, is design. How do we approach designing these kind of things? Because I feel like a lot of times folks may learn some techniques. They may learn how to move some pixels and polys, how to make a thing or two, but they run into real snags when they start trying to come up with ideas for new things to make. Aliens and alien concepts are a bottomless well you can go to, and it's proven time and time again when you see the success of products that are these kind of alien concepts. It's a bottomless well you can go to. And if you go to it with a little bit of insight into the design process, and you keep hearing me say these words, form language. If you go into it with design process and form language in mind, then you can approach it in a way that is creative and spontaneous and new and original, but still heavily informed by those concepts of form language and form psychology that will help make it successful in what you're seeking to do with it. Now, I particularly loved this piece because here we're totally ignoring the bulk of the body, and really what we're looking at is the form language introduced around the face. And yet again, here we have something that's a wildly different shape than everything else that we've seen so far. Yet, if we look, we still have those lines thrusting downward. The brow has been pushed to thrust downward. Everything is pointing down toward the mouth, and subsequently further down toward the torso. It fascinates me to no end how that works. Even the musculature of the neck, though it's holding a very human anatomy still, the depth of those muscles, the cut, the striation, all of that stuff, even these subtle little lines in this just as a concept piece, and even the hair, all of it is thrusting the eye down to try and find goals that are off screen, if you catch what I'm saying. It's interesting because you'll focus on the eyes, and typically you'll look at the eyes, then the mouth, and then travel down and scan the rest of the form. It's just how we see things. It's just how human beings as creatures are wired to work. And so we can use that to our advantage in design. When you look at some of the subtle little secondary details, you see that over and over, probably without even really realizing it, the artist on this created all these lines that thrust our eyes in. They thrust our eyes into the things we want to see, or the things that they want us to see, but they also, probably subconsciously, are driving us in a very sexual sort of way. All that is kind of fascinating stuff, and it plays directly into how you think about creating concepts like this to use for products. So this is another one, and again, here we see the changes to the human form still run through that pattern over and over. And I'm wanting you to kind of notice that from one wildly different style of art to another, from one artist to another, design after design after design after design after design that are all wildly different, hugely creative, all belong to different art styles, different genres of science fiction, you know, all very different alien races. Regardless, there are things we can see that connect them all together. Oh, sorry, I had that one up twice. So, in seeing those things and the way they connect them together, that's what we should be looking for. When you take a look, one of the things that I would love to be able to teach, to be able to relay to folks, is how to look at other people's artwork in a way that teaches you. When we look at other art, when we look at sculpts, look at concept art, things like that, you want to look at this stuff and look for what's different, appreciate what's different, appreciate just however it strikes you, but then allow that initial feeling that's created by whatever that piece of artwork is to fade. Push that aside, and then start looking at it and saying, now, why did this have that effect on me? Does a facial expression make me respond with a smile? Does it make me respond with a frown? How do I respond to that? If I respond in this way, why did that happen? Was it this set of lines? Was it this choice in design? Was it this particular part of the pose? There's a lot of things like that you can think of. And a part of the point that I'm trying to make here is that a lot of times people think of art and they think, oh, it's inspired and it's all blah, 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 all this kind of stuff about, you know, where's my inspiration? Where's my muse? How do I blah, 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 do all this stuff? It's not. It's really not. It can be. There's a certain degree of inspiration to be had in it. And there's times when ideas come to you and it's great and it's cool and it's fun. However, I personally am a working artist. And a working artist has to be able to call on creativity on demand. You have to be able to let that stuff fly on demand. And the way you're able to do that, at least from my experience, is by really analyzing the things you like to look at. So when you do that, you look at these things and you kind of start to take notes for yourself. You start to ask questions about your own responses and file those questions away so that it becomes something you then add to your own tool set. You think about the lines, you think about the shapes, you think about the attitudes, the color choices. All of these things play into how you respond to something. When you learn to analyze your own response to a piece of art, that is a huge step towards actually being able to analyze that piece of art itself, which is another step towards being able to improve your own art. And that's really at the heart of everything I've been trying to do with all of these seminars that we do here, is trying to help you guys improve your art, help you improve your skill set, and your creativity and make the coolest stuff you possibly can. Okay, so hopefully, hopefully that whole subject matter makes some sense. I know it's kind of an esoteric sort of thing. It's kind of an ephemeral thing that floats around a bit, and it's hard to, you know, it's like, well, how does that really relate to things? Well, we're going to get into that here in just a moment. And once I kick over into Daz Studio, and we send a figure over to Zbrush, and we actually start sculpting and working with it a bit and playing around. Today's entire session is going to be focused just on coming up with concepts and on ways to approach this sort of content and come up with ideas that you'll be excited to work on and that people will be excited to buy. So I'm taking a moment now just to look over at the chat before I continue on, because I know I've kind of tossed a lot of really high concept information out there, and a lot of high concept sort of ideas out there in this first quarter of today's show. And I want to look over at the chat and see if anyone has any comments, check out what kind of conversation is going on over there, and see what if anything I can kind of respond to, and maybe, I don't know, share a little bit more in that area. Hopefully all this stuff is making sense to everyone. All right, so looks like everyone's pretty much on the same page. That's cool. Very happy about that. I hope everything that I had to say regarding design and just looking at artwork and getting inspiration from things and thinking about design elements, I hope that stuff really made sense. Now let's pop over to Daz Studio. And since I've already built the Alien Allure figure, let's take a look at just some of the process behind that sort of thing. In the coming weeks, we're going to go into the specifics, where you're going to see things about how the polypaint was done on that. You're going to see how to paint those things, building the surface texture, all kinds of stuff like that. Today is really an overview of everything that's coming with this particular kit and some other little add-ons for it that we'll be giving away in the coming weeks. So let's open up. Actually, I don't want that. I want this one. Here we go. That's fine. So let's open up the Genesis 3 female. Now, you might be asking yourself, well, Les, Genesis 8 is out. Why are we using Genesis 3? That's not the latest, greatest figure on the market right now. What are you doing, man? Well, there's an answer for that. Genesis 8 is new, and it's shiny, and it's polished, and it's popular-ish, and it's doing all right, and that's great. There's definitely an appetite for content for it. However, Daz has done a really good job of building Genesis 8 to be backwards compatible with Genesis 3. That being the case, quite often, you're actually going to be better off as you build content to still work on Genesis 3 up until you're done, and then migrate the Genesis 3 content upstream to Genesis 8. This is going to do a couple things for you. One of the things that I personally like about Genesis 8 is that the arms, by default, are in an A pose. The arms hang down to the side somewhat. I'm a big fan of that, but I also recognize that it presents some interesting little difficulties in creating clothing at times, because with the arms hanging down, you don't have a perfectly straight X-axis plane to work from. And that can create some little issues. Quite often, if I'm working on a game project or a film project, I will want my character to be A-posed for rigging, but I will repose it to a T-pose to build clothing and things like that onto it, and then pose all that stuff back to an A-pose to rig it. So they actually go hand in hand. The fact that G8 works so well with things migrated to it from G3 kind of illustrates my point about that. G3 gives us the T-posed figure to work from, so that we have that nice flat X-axis plane across the arms to build from, that makes mirroring things easy, makes thinking about things easier in some ways. But then we can just migrate all that at the end if we're doing clothing. If we're doing morphs and things, there are some ways to migrate that stuff. It's really neat. It's really kind of an interesting thing. And I like that the way G8 is built allows for this kind of backward compatibility. It does a lot of good things for users out there who maybe have a library of content built up for G3. And it also allows a lot of us who maybe have little tools and tricks and things that we use for building things for G3 to keep those things in play. So it's nice that I think of G8 as less of an upgrade and more of a side grade, because it really is a lot of G3 in that figure. And it's just a few nice little tweaks that I kind of like in the end. So all that to say, that's why I'm starting on G3, and then eventually toward the end of this series we'll be doing a little bit of G8 migration, because that's actually a really hot topic right now too. So anyway, I'm going to take one more look over at the chat before we jump in. I see Miss V had a question. She asks, are there colors or backgrounds that lend themselves to be more feminine? Yes. Yes, I would say yes, although some folks would probably argue this with me, because these days when it comes to subject matter like that, people like to argue about everything. But in a very real sense, more garish tones, things that have a high degree of contrast, high degrees of either extreme brightness or extreme darkness, and tons and tons and tons and tons of contrast, tend to be more masculine, more aggressive. You could combine that idea with some of the more feminine side of things, the softer tones, less contrast. You could combine those things. You could take soft tones that still have a high contrast to each other. Let's say you had a light purple and you contrasted that through some sharp lines against a deeper orange next to it. Those colors, even if they're in a soft pastel form, are still going to bounce off each other and create a dynamism in the color palette. They're going to be complementary. That's another important thing, is having complementary colors in your palette for any design. But then if you go to the slightly more muted spectrum of those colors, that's going to have a softer, more floral type aspect to it. And that's going to be, in a color theory sense, going to tend to be more traditionally feminine. So, also, more masculine colors tend to have, it's not necessarily so much brightness as much as it is intensity. Then also your duller, like dirtier colors, your browns, your sepia tones, your muted reds, things like that tend to evoke a more masculine sort of state. It's also interesting because it kind of goes to certain things about how men and women see things. So, and there's a whole pile of just interesting subject matter you can get into in that, as to why, you know, men tend towards certain colors more than women and so on. And all of that stuff plays into how we design things, especially things like aliens. Because when you're designing aliens and monsters, the more of basic human psychology you allow to inform your concepts, the more the inhuman parts become familiar. The more those things kind of dig into your psyche and you accept them. So it's an interesting line we have to walk when we're doing concept work anyway. We have to try and balance ourselves between the surreal or the unreal and the imaginative stuff, and with elements of reality that we bring in. Color palette, color theory, all of that stuff, shapes, form language, all of those things play into the things that we can bring in from reality and then twist and turn and play with to create a response in the viewer. So, also in the chat right now, Jason has done us the wonderful favor of sharing a link to www.colormatters.com/color-an, and I believe these are interesting. Yes. Nice. Thank you, Jason. Very cool. Yeah, he shared this great link to this stuff for us on color theory, and I would highly recommend everyone take some time and read that. Not right now, though. Don't read it right now. Wait till the show's over. But take some time and read that and go through and really familiarize yourself with these ideas of color theory, complementary colors, primary colors, secondary, tertiary, so on and so forth. I had the good fortune of having a really advanced art teacher in high school who hammered that stuff into my head for 4.5 solid years. So that's kind of cool. A lot of people don't get that, and it's really important stuff to really digest and add to your own sense of design. Really try to make that stuff become reflexive, where without even having to think about it, you start to pair up colors that go well together. When you're dealing with color, that's an important thing. All right, now let's get into what is, to me, the really, really fun stuff. Let's send our girl here. Hopefully YouTube doesn't freak out that we had a nude human female on the screen for a while. Derp. Prudes. Let's send this over to Zbrush. I'll speak European for a minute. British even. Or Australian. We'll call it Zed. Zed's dead, baby. Zed's dead. And yes, I make that joke every time I say Zbrush because it always cracks me up. I never get tired of Pulp Fiction. So while we're waiting for old Zed to open up, oh, there it is. Yay, Zbrush 4R8. Woohoo. We have arrived. Zbrush 4R8. Booyah. Let's just kill that window that always pops up, and I have to figure out how to make that go away because I don't like it. And we'll draw our figure out on the stage. And I will immediately go into activate symmetry. Go in and draw with symmetry on along my x-axis. And there are some things I know going in that I want to do. So I've already established my connection with GoZ. That's great. ZBrush is open. We have the figure brought over. I actually want to pop back over into DAZ Studio for a moment and recognize that there are some things I can do inside here that I can actually send over to ZBrush. So for instance, I might go ahead and elongate some body parts. It's kind of a fun thing to do. Let's just maybe here you can see also I have I tend to keep my parameters in edit mode, and I have show hidden turned on. That allows us some interesting things we can do, like scaling on the y-axis, which, since that doesn't have limits set on it, I need to do that with my mouse instead of a pen, because with the pen it does some strange things. So I can scale on the y-axis, and then we could send that across. Of course, that's a bit much right there. We could also just control click and get all of those body parts at once. So that's probably a good amount of elongation to add. Then let's take some key torso elements and do the same. Then let's do the two joints of the neck. Of course, we could go really crazy with that, which is kind of fun, truth be told. Of course, scaling the head does some bizarre stuff. I'm kind of amazed that it performs so strangely. Now let's grab some arm elements, and let's use our X scale on those a little bit. And here I'm going to grab all of the elements of the hands. Scale all of that on X so that it becomes a little longer. Now back in Zbrush, I'm storing a morph target, and all this is really for is so that I have this sort of elongated, already alienized kind of take on the character, on the figure, that I can dial back and forth between. So now I'll go back to DS and just restore the figure. All I really wanted out of that was to have this extreme elongation in place so I can switch back and forth and see those differences using my morph target palette right here. Oh, and glancing over at the chat, I see a question. Bubba Squid asks, is there a technical benefit to scaling in DS before going to ZBrush? Like going back to DS, do you potentially lose some accuracy when fitting the rig to a heavily deformed shape? Actually, there really isn't any benefit to it technically as far as rigging, because in the end, when we set up our final shape and we start working on the actual package, what we're going to do is use auto rig to move all of our joints around to really pick up the shape the best that they can. And so a lot of that scaling, actually all of that scaling, would be lost at that point in the sense of using the scale dials. All I'm using that for there is to create some broad strokes of scaling for the sake of shaping that I can then have access to very quickly over inside ZBrush. It's actually using DAZ Studio as a starting point for building some shape. So that's all that really was. Now that I have that elongated shape, I'm going to introduce you folks to the Layers palette. And the Layers palette is kind of tricky and a bit of a misnomer. I'm still not quite sure why they called it Layers, but whatever. It's their program. They can call things whatever they like. It's not like Layers in Photoshop. Actually, the subtool menu is closer to using Layers in Photoshop or Maya or any other program that uses Layers. So it's really bizarre. It's one of those off the beaten track paradigms that ZBrush has embedded in it. But what I will do is switch, I will set up a layer, we'll just click the plus sign, and here we're now in record mode. And if I switch to the elongated shape and then turn off record mode, now I have that stored. So now I can delete that morph target and still be able to go back to that shape here in my Layers tab. Now what that does, and I'm going to go ahead and name this elongation. That will allow me to then do different sculpts, play around with different shapes, and then be able to look at those shapes with that elongation on. It also allows me to do some interesting little tricks, like we can duplicate that elongation layer right here. And so let's just call this one oh, my bad. Forgot to hit name. Elongate arms. Okay. And what I'll be doing here is turning that off, store a morph target of our original shape. We turn that back on, and while the record button is on, we're able to sculpt in this mode, right? So I'll drag a mask over the arms, and now pull my morph dial, and that's going to give me that elongated shape sequestered to just those arms. Then with these layers, we can dial up how much we want, plus we can dial in the negative. So you end up creating a set of tools here that you can then use for creating different shapes and really playing around a lot with your proportions. That is an incredibly handy design tool to have when you're concepting out aliens. So the way that you set a morph inside Zbrush, you can see here with my interface, and I'm using my custom interface. I think everyone at some point should take the time to sort of play around and analyze their own workflow and develop, you know, whatever kind of UI best suits your needs. For mine, I have docked a number of frequently used commands and buttons at the top of my screen. One of the most important of those being the slider and buttons for the main aspects of the morph target menu. So whenever we click on the morph target menu, right now we have a morph target saved that is this shape. So if I delete that morph target, we store it, and then let's just say we do something really stupid. That allows us to then slide back and forth between our saved shape and whatever we just sculpted. So I like to use that in conjunction with the layers menu to create different proportions and to explore different things, and then be able to mask off areas and sort of save for myself different presets right here that I can then dial up later when the time comes and I want to play around with different proportions for creating some kind of an alien. You can actually pre-save for yourself all kinds of cool stuff like that. Just save a ZTL file of this. I would actually distribute a file like that if we were allowed, but we're not. You know, it breaks the DAS EULA to distribute something like that. You're not allowed to redistribute their, you know, their 3D assets, yada, 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 all that cool stuff. So that being the case, part of what I'm showing you here in this is how to build for yourself this sort of proportion rig inside Zbrush that becomes really handy when you're doing a concept that is, you know, some kind of an alien where you get to play around with those lengths and all that kind of stuff. So let's go through and repeat that process, shall we, to create some separate sliders here just to control the legs and then the head and neck. So here I'm going to duplicate this again. Once we duplicate it, I will turn one off. That way it's not doubling up. And then hit record. We'll go inside here, and this one is going to be just the legs. So let's mask these off. And then pardon me. We should be able to then dial all of this back in. And let's rename that elongate legs. So there now we can see the legs and the arms together. We could dial in different amounts of each. We could even combine those with the original shape and double up all of that. There's a lot that can do. Let's go back to our original now and duplicate it one more time. Turn that off. Go into record. This time I want to mask off the head and neck. And we'll dial in the rest of the body. And now, in theory, if we turn each of these on and turn them up, we should get something pretty close to that original elongated shape. But by having these this way, we can dial in whatever degrees we want of one thing or another. The really interesting and fun part of using the layer palette like that is that we can very quickly create, say one day you're working in ZBrush, you don't have an idea for anything, you're just like, oh my god, what am I doing? Well, I've got some time and I want to spitball something and play around a little bit. I encourage people to take time to do that. You need to take time sometimes just to play around and see where things land. So sometime when you have a little bit of time to do that, just open up Daz Studio, load in a G3 figure, send it to ZBrush, and start creating layer after layer after layer of large sweeping body type movements. You don't really have to have a design goal in mind for doing those. You just start pulling things and pushing things. And, well, here, I'll just push this out. I'll scale this. I'll move that. You push all those things around and save them in these layers. And pretty soon, you have for yourself this library of shapes that can be used to generate all kinds of interesting things. So then you start dialing through those shapes and you find that maybe something strikes you as a cool idea. Maybe something you're like, oh, what if I took that shape and added this, that, or the other to it? So that there's a lot of interesting ways that you can actually kind of tickle your own imaginative nerve with that and jog your brain into coming up with ideas. So at this point, let's turn these guys off. Like I said, I wish I could share this as an asset with you guys, but unfortunately I can't. So hopefully what I've shown you here will help you create an asset like that for yourselves. I'm going to go ahead and take a moment and do what I was just talking about and build some other shapes in here. And this is kind of sly in a way, because one of the things that I can do with this is any of these shapes that I build in, we could actually send those back to ZBrush at some point and be able to dial them in and use them in ZBrush much the same way I'm using them here in the layers palette. So we could actually use that to build ourselves a creature creation kit of sorts, where we have all these different elongated parts and some cool things. There's a lot of neat stuff that you could do with that. In the short term, though, I'm just going to spend a little bit of time working with building up a few more shapes and things that will be interesting that we can kind of dial back and forth in between. So I've gone ahead and grouped by UV tiles here, or UV groups. And there's a couple of things I suggest doing by way of a change once you have that. If we Control-Shift-click on the eyelashes, okay, those are their own group, I actually want to group the eyelashes in with the face, because whenever I happen to move the eyelid area, I want to make sure that I'm moving those eyelashes with it. So there, we've polygrouped that. Then I also want to add the eye moisture mesh to that same group. So let's just Control Shift click and add the Alt key as we drag over part of that. And now we can shrink selection. And let's just make a selection from that. There's some interesting strategies you have to use sometimes in getting exactly what you want visible. Now that we have just the face group with the eye moisture, let's make a group, a polygroup of that. What that's going to allow us to do, once we have polygroups made of everything, that's going to allow us to quickly select areas, make masks, use a number of different commands inside Zbrush that relate to polygroups that make the process of sculpting a little bit easier. So now let's go into the eyes, and I believe those are going to be a couple of polygroups, and let's polygroup those together. So we have, you'll notice that when we do that UV group command, that's going to break the model up into groups that correspond to each of the different UV tiles. Those UV tiles are what correspond to the maps that the model requires. It all uses the UDIM, the UDIM format for doing those UV tiles. So that's why the eyes end up having two different groups, because there's actually two different maps that go on them. We're going to get things set up so that those are visible, and then polygroup those together. And then I'm going to mask those eyeballs. And also, let's just mask around the eyes, because some of the things that I want to play around with at the moment, I really don't want to alter the eyes at all. And let's do the same with the mouth. I don't want to alter that mouth. Now let's make a new layer, and we're going to work on some interesting little sort of utilities here for a moment. So let's make a layer where we remove her ears. So there I'm just holding the Shift key and paint over the ears for a moment. And I might come back in from a side view and respread this mesh out so that we get a nice clean spread on that. And then we can hold the Shift key and paint back over it again one more time. Let's turn off our wires. Another thing that you can do also that gives you a little smoother view is if we hit D, we can go into dynamic subdivs. And there, it decided to flood with polypaint for me, so that's not cool. So now in dynamic subdiv mode, you actually see what that model is going to look like subdivided. And whenever you hide mesh while you have dynamic subdiv turned on, it will temporarily turn that off. Okay. And let's just take an H polish and smooth that stuff out with it a little bit more. I like to use the blend shader quite a bit when I work on stuff like this. So there we've just smoothed out those ears. The nice thing about that, if we look at our polyframe, you can smooth those ears out and end up leaving yourself enough topology there to pull other kinds of ears out without being beholden to the human shape. So now that I've made an ear remove shape, let's come over here and name that ears remove. And just as with these other shapes, you can send that shape over to Daz Studio and have it over there where we can mix and match things between them. So now let's turn that layer back off, and here you can see that layer in action. And then we'll make a new layer. And for some reason it's flooding everything with black when I make my layers. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes it will take whatever your alternate color is and do some strange things with it with layers. Zbrush, like any piece of software, is not perfect. Sometimes you run into little oddities like that. That's okay. We can roll with that. It's not really a game changer for anything. So now let's do a nose removal. Okay. So again, I'm going to mask the mouth. I want to make sure that that's masked off, and the eyes. And then let's come back out of the dynamic subdiv mode for a moment and just paint around the eyes. Then maybe invert. That way we can blur our masking. And now let's create female Voldemort. I'm just going to pull with a move brush, excuse me. Pull the nose up a bit, and then let's take that smoothing down just a little bit, and here we've completely removed that nose from the face. Might want to give it just a hint of a nose bump there. And then let's go back to our dynamic subdiv and go to the H polish, make our brush a little larger. And we'll use that to just sort of flatten out where the topology, the density of topology there caused those little nubs to happen. And so there we have a really nice nose removal. So at this point, we have reached the usual allocated time for my 1 hour break in the middle of these, where we stop for a moment, grab a drink, hear the call of nature, stretch your legs, do all that kind of cool stuff. And so I'm going to take a moment and review the chat and see if anyone has any questions or comments so far. And then we'll take our short break, come back, build a few more shapes, and then start pushing a little deeper into something that has more of an alien aspect to it. Today, most of what we're going to be going over is just ways and strategies of coming up with these different shapes that you can use to build up some alien ideas for yourself. And I think when we're done building those, we're going to give you the little bonus of sending all that back over to Daz Studio. And since I can't distribute to you guys an actual ZBrush file, what we can do is send these shapes back to Daz Studio, set them up over there, and make for you guys a little resource kit of all these kind of shapes that you can then take and use for yourselves. So I think that's what we're going to try to head toward, and that's where we'll wrap things up at the end of the second hour. So I'm going to take that short break as soon as I look at the chat. So let's see what we have going on over here. Let's see. A whole lot of questions in the last few minutes. I'm going to take that as a good thing. And on that lovely note, you crazy kids hang tight for just a minute. Enjoy yourselves. Talk amongst yourselves about whatever while I go grab some coffee, take my little break for a second. And when I come back, we'll hit the second hour of this up and running as we build some more shapes and then save them out over into DS so that we can put together a little package for you guys. So I'll be right back. All right, and we are back. Looks like we had a quiet bunch in the chat today, which is interesting because we have a good number of people watching today too, so it's kind of neat. Kind of funny. More people, quieter chat. Don't know how that works out, but okay, fine. I'll roll with that. We're good. We're good. So let's go ahead with a couple more shapes, build a few more little utilities that we can have here that'll be kind of handy for use in creating alien concepts. So let's add another layer. And let's do... This stuff is actually... This is fun. Okay, guys, I have to be honest. This is just like the fun end of a lot of what we get to do. So let's take... let's turn that back on. Let's do maybe a raised brow. Here I'm just taking a standard brush, and I'm kind of borrowing a bit from some of the types of lines that you see. I think this one kind of was influencing me there for a minute. So I'm just kind of borrowing some lines. This is a common sort of shape you see. You see this sort of thing in Star Trek stuff a lot. The pronounced brow. So let's just call that shape Pro. Well, it would help if I hit the naming button. Oh, there we go. I did. Never mind. Pronounced brow. And you could sort of preview how this stuff will play together in Zbrush just by turning things on. So here we can dial back some of the nose. Here we could add in some of that brow. Maybe take the ears away. Play with the elongation. You can really start to play around with these things just here inside Zbrush with the layer palette. So let's go ahead and do a couple more things with the ears, maybe. Let's, don't want to work on that without a record layer turned on. So now let's just smooth some of the ear out. And then we can pull that into another shape. Sometimes it's a little more intuitive to work without dynamic subdiv turned on, because it'll respond faster. When reshaping the ears, I'm probably going to focus on using the Move Topological brush. So let's call this I don't know, I need a name for what this shape should be. Probably just going to give these some generic names since these are really just building blocks. But there, oh, that's actually starting to head in the direction of that kind of concept art there, which I don't want to totally, like, you know, steal somebody's design, so I'll be sure to kind of veer away from that. Also, you guys can probably hear Mr. Heisenberg and Toki starting to have their say in things in the background. That is the beauty and curse of the studio dogs. So I think everyone has heard Toki and Heisenberg pipe up from time to time in the course of these. We love our boys. here's some interesting shaping. And then we could use this, actually, let's call this Alien Ears 1. We could use this shape as a starting point for another shape. Let's just turn it off and then duplicate it. And now we turn on the duplicate and hit the record button, and we're able to continue altering that shape so it becomes a basis for yet another shape. And here you can see I'm starting to kind of go back to some of that some of those design points I was talking about the thrust of the lines and how they drive the eyes forward or drive the eyes down into the body. So let's mask some of this and then polish it. It's always a good way to get the topology to start spreading back out a little bit so that you can use it a little bit more. So I kind of like that. And as I'm making shapes like this, a lot of times I kind of let my imagination run a little bit wild and think about things like, you know, what in this creature's evolution would cause it to have this? You know, does it have some kind of special organs in the back of its head that the ears play into that gives it, you know, heightened hearing, or does it have some kind of radar? Things like that. And as goofy as those kind of things may seem, if you think in those terms while you're working, you start to find yourself answering design questions out of it, and then that leads to other design ideas. So let's rename that one Alien Ears 2. Now let's start up a new one that will become Alien Ears 3. Let's go with something completely different. Just pull these things way, way, way on out. Maybe do something entirely goofy. Or just weird, you know, just something weird. Like let's pull some shape into the cheekbones. Here I'm using a clay buildup brush. And let's just make a little bit of masking. That way we don't accidentally affect the teeth or the eyes. Whenever possible, if I can leave those things in place, that's a good thing. At least in creating a sort of resource kit for myself like this, and a bunch of starting points, because the more I end up having the eyes or teeth moved, the more trickiness I end up having to deal with when I adjust my rigging. Let's go back and kind of rethrust this upward. Of course, a lot of these same techniques that you see used can be used on things like you know, horror, you know, demon ideas, animal people, stuff like that. There's all kinds of ways that this stuff applies. It just happens that aliens are such a great, ubiquitous sort of concept that we can play around with and do so much with that, you know, it's like that's kind of the area where I think you have the most creative freedom a lot of times, you know. Let's just pull this maybe back in like that. I kind of like that shape. That's an interesting shape right there. But this is all about exploring form language, and I can see right there, like, see how as I smooth that, it sort of introduced a new shape that I might want to heighten a little bit. I might want to play around with that and see where that leads. So now we're starting to get something that's again really different. Reggie asks, if I add extra points to the figure, will it change the figure from G3? Yes, it absolutely will. We could subdivide this. If we turned our masking off, we could subdivide it and work on the subdivided version, and we could send the lowest subdivision back over. So we could work on that. And eventually I will. Eventually I will do that. Once we get into really developing the shape that we used for the alien allure kit, when we get into developing what's going to be a final shape for our design, then I'll subdivide and use that. But even then, there is a plugin for DAZ Studio that introduces the ability to edit HD shapes. HD shapes meaning the ability to have shapes that correspond to different subdivision levels of the model. Unfortunately, that plugin has a locked license. And in order to use that plugin or distribute any content made with that plugin, you have to have a special invitation-only license from DAZ. And that is very locked down, very proprietary. They don't like to let that, they don't really even like talking about that a whole lot, from my understanding. And so I really can't, since what I'm showing is really meant for what is for the market of CGBytes, that market isn't allowed to sell HD geometry pieces. So the way in which we would use subdivisions, we can still use subdivisions. We can still use the data from our subdivided model. We just have to do it in a very different way. We can't do it directly in DAZ Studio. The primary way that we do that is by we alter the shape at the lowest resolution. That becomes our morph. And then that extra bit of detail that we get when we sculpt at high resolutions is baked into our displacement maps, and then we use those maps to bring out that kind of shaping. We use a combination of displacement and normal maps to get that stuff into place. It's actually not a bad thing. You can do a lot, I mean a lot with that. So it's not like you're really missing all that much. So that hopefully answers the question on that, though. So let me go ahead and name this layer. This one was Alieneers 3. Okay. And we'll turn that one off. Now let's do a few things to the eyes. Okay, so I'm going to mask those eyes. And actually, this is a good moment to pop back over to DS. Or not. You know what? Let's not. Let's not. One of the things you guys may laugh at sometimes is like, there are so many different ways to accomplish any one thing that sometimes I may start to do something and then in the middle of it think to myself, you know, I'd rather go over here and do this. Let's do this way. So let's take our Gizmo 3D and just alt-click to go to the eyes. We have the eyes masked off. And I'm going to unmask some area of mesh around the eyes as well. And then let's mask down the nose and blur that a bit. And then let's make the eyes really quite large. That's some fun stuff. And then let's just smooth out around that area. There we go. Right. And then maybe pull that forward just a bit. Yeah, let's pull that forward. And then, let's see, do we have, let's have symmetry on. And blend that in a little bit. I'm just holding the shift key to smooth it. Okay. Kind of getting into some classic sort of alien concept right there. I see Matt Pitt's comment. I think he's talking about the HD tools. Yeah, that there are some tricky things about using those. So it's actually, I don't know, it's its own thing, you know. There's a lot of discussion that could be had about that. All right. So let's call this Alien Eyes 1. And let's just rinse and repeat that, shall we? So let's mask off this area again. Then let's blur that mask, and let's grab our Move 3D gizmo again. And I see Mr. Brent has joined us, Mr. Brent Bowers. If you go back and watch the rewatch, Brent, you'll see there are some shapes that I've made during this session that I know you particularly have been itching to see somebody do. So this will be fun. This is a nice crazy shape that is going to lend itself to some utterly bizarre ideas. So here I'm just hiding some of these other elements while I sculpt out a little more shape behind that cavity for the eyes. Let's turn on our poly frame here so that we can kind of restore some of our symmetry down the middle. Sometimes when you pull things apart with the Gizmo 3D, you'll lose some of your symmetry because it'll pull that center line in some funky ways. Alien Eyes Dose. Matt Pitts asks, are the eyes still masked? I'm just masking and remasking them as I go. And did I? There we go. There we go. So, alien eyes. Oh man, I messed up there. Hold on a second. Hold on, let's undo a couple times. Undo, there we go. Okay. So this is one of the joys, one of the handy little attributes of having that morph saved. I had actually forgotten to turn on my layer recording. So now let's turn that on, and I can switch to that shape now. And when I turn it off, we're fine. So I almost didn't save that eye shape, but because I had it stored in my morph there, I was able to get it back. So I need to rename this one Alien Eyes 1. And now let's turn that off and grab this one and rename it Alien Eyes 2. And again, we can mix and match with these. So, you know, you can do all kinds of wacky stuff with those shapes. And let's do one more Alien Eyes shape, just for good measure. So we'll mask the eyes. Then draw some masking around that area. And let's maybe go pretty deep in here, like that. Blur it. And now let's go maybe up. Let's see what an upward thrust on that looks like. Nah, not really digging that. How about we go in here, like this. Let's reorient our tool. Let's go larger. I like larger on the eyes. And then I'm going to come around and smooth this stuff back out a little bit. But then let's move them back in toward the center a little bit. So it really is just larger and not really moved off. Sometimes the most unsettling things are the subtle. Okay, so let's call this one Alien Eyes 3. So here you can see where Heisenberg, no. Calm it down, dog. Mr. Heisenberg says no. So here you can see we're starting to build up a nice little library of shapes that we could pull together for all kinds of uses. Let's do a few more. Let's clear my masking. Now let's do a little bit of jaw removal. This will be kind of interesting. So I'm going to smooth this jawline in. And then let's take our clay brush and just sort of add some form to the throat. This is clay buildup I'm using. And we'll call that Alien Chin 1. Should be interesting to combine that with some other shapes. Let's do another alien chin. Just about got everything that I would want in here right now for a session of alien concepting. Okay, let's do something a little more dramatic. I highly encourage anyone who is interested in doing kind of imaginative, original characters to load this stuff up, load the figure up into Zbrush, and really play around with building yourself a library of just shapes that make you think things that you can pull together for a lot of different purposes. I find that a really strange shape, and I dig it. So I think I'm only going to keep like 2 alien chins in here. Right. Now let's spend a little time on the body. Let's add another layer here. And I'm going to go ahead and save this just somewhere temporary. So I'm just going to call this Alien Shapes. And the next area that I want to start looking at that presents a great opportunity for using some of those design lines that I was talking about earlier, some of those forms and form language, is around the rib cage and through the pelvis. So let's start off with maybe some tightening. And then it may seem counter to the concept of doing something sexy, but I actually want to kind of decrease the amount of breast volume on here for one of these alien shapes. I know all the guys watching are like, no, not smaller breasts. Maybe not all the guys, but some. Some will find that a travesty. To which I say, get your mind out of the gutter. Nah, I'm just joking. Okay, let's smooth some of this out a little bit. And maybe I'm going to take a clay buildup and kind of heighten some of that shape in the abs. And then pull some of this rib cage back out. So let's call that Alien Torso 1. Then let's do another one. And we don't have to be beholden to that starting point I used of the scaling inside Daz Studio just because we want to alter parts of a body. We can work with that inside here too. I just wanted to show that as an example of one method. So here I'm going to mask off the top half of this body, then invert it, and move everything up just a little tiny bit. Now let's invert that back again and start smoothing some of this. And it actually creates a really bizarre shape that I kind of like. Now let's add a little bit of heightened peak to the pelvic girdle. Maybe try to bring out a little bit of anatomy here and there. That's pretty cool. I like that. That's a really popular kind of form language too. You see that in there's a handful of products out there from some folks, and you see this sort of thing happen from time to time, and folks really seem to dig this. So, you know, here's a nice starting point for that. So that's going to be Alien Torso 2. And let's do a third Alien Torso where we get really crazy with it. Okay, on this one, I'm going to pull some crazy stuff out of the back here. Let's just pull some spinal indentations out. Then maybe smooth those back in a little bit, because we still want to keep it kind of on the feminine side. But this is kind of bringing out her inner reptile a little bit. And we could maybe bolster some of that anatomy, bring out a little bit of that shaping. Also, sometimes it's handy to take a pinch brush and we can almost create some hard edges, which I think plays well into an alien concept, because once you have those added, then we can very easily start pulling and get these nice sort of cleft edges, even with a low resolution topology. Kind of like that. Now let's add a little bit more of that around the hips. Sometimes I'll pull some polys together with a pinch brush like this, and then we can push those in. Like that. And once we've pushed them in, we could smooth them back a little bit, and then you see these kind of shapes that you get. This is the kind of stuff, too, that, like, knowing how things are going to behave, knowing how the brushes like that are going to behave under your hands, is really something you only ever get, I think, just from either experiencing it or getting the chance to watch someone who has experienced it, you know, kind of show it, which is kind of why I'm the one doing this. So that's a pretty interesting shape. I like that. That's got some neat possibilities design-wise. Okay. So that's Alien Torso 3. Now let's do a little something with the fingers. Make sure we have our symmetry turned on. And the fingers are actually a place that I really kind of prefer playing with their proportions inside DAZ Studio, because sometimes the masking that you have to do on those inside ZBrush is a little bit picky. So let's go in, and I'll show you my little trick for working with these. Is I'll just grab the first joint of each finger, and then you can right-click in the Scene tab and go to Select and hit Select Children, which I have a key command set for that's very handy. And then from there, I'll use my X scale. I'll make sure that I have all of them highlighted. And we'll use the X scale to add a great deal of length. What's also interesting is without even going into ZBrush, we could add that kind of length and slave that to a custom dial, and that in and of itself could be, you know, a kind of commercial package, just in some custom presets for all kinds of scaling attributes. So once I have that set on the one hand, I'll go into my symmetry menu, which is Shift-Y on your keyboard, and we're going to copy that from left to right. And over in ZBrush, I have a sculpting layer active and set to record. So I will send this to ZBrush, and I'm going to keep it at the current resolution. Excuse me. Oh, I hope I did that right. I have a bad feeling about something here. Oh, interesting. Interesting, interesting. Yeah, it did not want to bring that in quite right. Well, that's odd. It really should have brought that in that subtool. Well, now I'm curious about something. So let's see if I can relink this. Let's go here. Update an existing mesh. Okay, that's all fine. I'm going to hit accept. This is going to create something for the moment. That's fine. We're going to delete that. Right now I'm just kind of troubleshooting for a second because I caught something I might have done wrong, and I hope you guys don't fault me too much for it. So now let's send this back over. There we go. Now we're linked back up. Sometimes, just an aside for what you just saw, just to make sure that I kind of detail what that was, sometimes DAZ Studio and Zbrush, they lose their link to each other for what active tool you're working on. Sometimes you have to send something back to DAZ Studio once from Zbrush for it to go, okay, I'm working on that. And it's weird. It's really weird how that happens sometimes. But whenever you see, you send something over from DAZ and it doesn't either overwrite what you had here or add it to it or something like that, whenever you see it create a secondary tool like this, that's a moment where you know, oh crap, I need to go send this back over and let's do that. So that's what just happened there. So now I have my elongated fingers that I did inside DS in a layer here inside Zbrush. Now I can add some other shaping to that you couldn't do with just scale dials. So let's take a smooth and spindle these out a little bit. And there I'm just allowing that smooth brush to remove volume from the fingers. Gives them that weird, elongated kind of, I don't know, it's a strange feeling. And then I'm also going to kind of stretch the hand a little, give that a little thinner shape. And then let's place some of that on up into the arm. So we create that real slight, spindly sort of shape. Okay, so I'm going to call this Alien Hands. And then the next thing I want to do is kind of the same process, only with the feet. And the thing that I almost caught myself having messed up on, I have my figure at the lowest resolution, but the resolution level here really should stay at base. And so I want to make sure that at least while I'm working, I have that default change to base. So you just click on that gear and go in here and change that, and we'll hit accept. That way now I can't accidentally send this over at a wrong resolution. So now let's go into the toes, and you'll notice you can't really select the individual toe joints from out here in the viewport. So what we need to do is come over to our scene tab, and I just want to select each of these like this, and then I'm going to apply my key command for selecting the children. And just from the orientation of these, we're going to be scaling them on Z. So we can go nice and long with those little guys. And then let's grab maybe the foot itself and that toe joint. Let's do, no, let's just do the foot. Give it a little Z scaling. So there we create something that's on its way to being kind of disturbing. And then we'll mirror that shape over. I keep hitting the wrong key command there, my bad. And then we'll send that back over to ZBrush. Oh, let's undo. We need to make sure we have a recording layer turned on. Now we have that shape add it into a new recording layer. And just for the sake of stylistic consistency, I'm going to go through and do some of the same sort of smoothing to spindle those out, kind of as, like I did with the fingers. Okay. And then I'm also going to take this as an opportunity to sort of tweak that rotation that I see that was added in that scaling, and just bring that foot back much more relatively flat to the ground. Okay, so now let's call that alien feet. And we'll turn off recording on that layer. So now we have all these nifty neato layers in place. Okay, so let's just start going through and turning a few of these on. Here's that elongation. Now let's scroll down and look at that with alien feet. And what about with alien hands? Oh, there we go. Then let's do alien torso, number 3. That's kind of cool. Now we're really getting somewhere. Now we're starting to build an alien. So let's pull up. Let's do some alien eyes. Maybe let's do number 2. That's bizarre. That's just freaky. How about number 1? No, let's do number 3. There we go. There's number 3. Then let's dial in a little bit of alien chin, number 1. And how about a little bit of alien chin, number 2? Not much of that. Then let's go with some alien ears. Okay. And you know what we can't be without, because it's just such a part of what everyone, I think, looks to in alien designs these days. We have to do this one. There's a head shape that I forgot. So let's add a layer. Come back here. Let's mask this area. Let's go ahead and mask off a little bit right here as well. Okay. Let's mask off all of this. Oh, wait, nope. Let's invert that. Now let's mask all of this. Okay. And so this is kind of a ubiquitous sort of concept here. You see this done quite a lot. But you know, it is what it is for a reason. People dig it. So I know I used it on the Alien Allure kit. I've seen other people use it a lot in a number of places. So we'll just pull this, and we'll call this Alien Cranium 1. And then I'm going to duplicate it because I just want to keep building from the same idea there for a minute. Sometimes folks are, a little guilty of kind of going to the well on these sort of things, building off of that same concept over and over, but people seem to dig it. So here you go. This is kind of a little hint of some of that kind of stuff, which can really yield some cool results. I can't poo-poo on it. So this is going to be Alien Cranium 2. And then let's have one more of that, because you can never have too many bulbous-headed aliens. And let's just take this one and maybe go broad with it. And I might want to watch the center there, because that could end up doing some strange things. Let's do something broad and pull these up. Kind of like Dracula's hair in Francis Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula back in the early 90s. Love that movie. That shape always stuck with me as something just seriously cool. All right, and so that's alien cranium trois. All right, so at this point, we are ready to start sending all of the stuff over to DS. So now I'm just going to cycle through all of these crazy shapes. Let's go ahead and save my ZTL once, just to make sure that I have it. And now let's go and turn on, let's start with elongation. So let's send that over, update my existing object, hit accept, and I'm going to call this, actually I don't want to do that entire elongation. I want to do this piecemeal. I just have that one in here. So let's do just head and neck, or elongation, neck and head. Let's call it that. Okay, accept. Elongate neck plus head. Hit accept. And so now we should have that shape in here. And there it goes. We have that elongation in place. Then we want to adjust our rigging to go with that. So I'll go into my joint editor tool. And when we go into that, you can see that the bones stay here right now because we haven't done the adjustment yet. So let's right click and go to edit, adjust rigging to shape. And I'm going to uncheck all because I don't want it to look at any joints other than the stuff I know actually needs to change. Otherwise, it can take a while to calculate and it can screw up the calculation pretty badly. So I want to select neck lower and then check selected and children. And then over here, I want to uncheck all the face groups. And then go check off just the neck and head groups. And any of those facial element groups, like we want the left eye. Let's see, where are the other ones we want? There's the neck. Neck upper, right eye. And then there should be tongue, upper jaw, and then lower jaw. Those are the ones we want. So now let's hit accept. And there you see all those joints move into place. Once those have moved into place, now I should be able to right click on our morph, go to ERC freeze, and I'm going to freeze all of those to this dial. So now if we are in our joint editor and we drag that dial, we can see those joints moving with our shape. So let's set some limits on that. We can see that it starts to break up past -50. So let's set our lower limit, our minimum, at -50. So now we have some good limits on that. Now let's come over and turn that off in ZBrush. Let's grab our elongate legs. We'll send that over. And elongate legs. And I'm just going to go ahead and send a few of these over and kind of do this quickly since we're starting to run out of time. Let's come over and do elongate arms. Then remove ears. Remove nose. Then let's turn on brow prominence. Then alien ears 1. I'm just going to rifle through all of these pretty quickly. A lot of these don't even really require any rigging adjustments either. Then alien ears 2. Alien ears 3. Then this is alien eyes 1. Alien eyes 2. Alien eyes 3. Alien chin 1. And alien chin 2. Then alien torso 1. Alien torso 2. Alien torso 3. Then alien hands. Alien feet. Then the ubiquitous alien cranium. Number 1. Then here's alien cranium 2. And alien cranium 3. All right, so now we have all those shapes brought over here from Zbrush. There are a couple that we probably do need to do some rigging adjustment with. So let's take a look at alien hands. Drag those out. Then another way to use the joint editor and the auto rigging is to go into your scene tab, and let's just select, actually the forearms, and then if I use my key command to select all the children to those, now if I go into my joint editor while having all that selected, I can right click and go to edit, adjust rigging to shape. And now over here, let's uncheck all, right click and go to check from scene selection. And that is going to give us exactly what we have selected over here. That makes life so easy. So now let's uncheck all of this, and we want to grab, actually we could check all of that because it's not really going to affect anything to have all of that stuff selected. But still, it's probably a good habit just to only use what you need. So there we have forearm, hand, index, mid, pinky, ring. Let's grab forearm, hand, index, mid, pinky, ring. We hit accept. And now let's look at our currently used, and that'll show us that this morph is used. ERC freeze. We'll grab all of this good stuff. Hit accept. Now we restore that figure. And we get our alien hands. And those should still work really well with our pose controls on the hands. So now let's look at maybe a grasp and see what we get. Not bad. Not bad at all. Right. Now then, let's do the same thing with the feet. So let's grab Genesis 3 female, go into our Zbrush group here. We're eventually going to move those into their own group. But let's grab alien feet. Now we're going to select both of the feet. And then I just selected everything downstream. So if we click in the scene tab, you can see that's all selected. And now I'll grab my joint editor, right click, edit, adjust rigging to shape, uncheck all, check from scene selection. And this time I'm going to leave these influencing groups all on because they're really not going to make a difference. Everything that's on the head, all the small stuff that really you have to be concerned about sometimes, that's all so far away that it's going to ignore it. So we hit accept. Boom, there we have those joints in place. So now let's go to our currently used morphs. Right click, ERC freeze, accept. And let's set some limits on all of this stuff all at once. Here I shift select all of those, right click, go to set, min max limits, and I'm going to set the minimum on all those morphs to 0. So now here we have our alien feet. Okay. Then let's see, is there anything else that I want to link up to anything? I think there was a torso morph. That one right there, alien torso 2. So let's grab everything from ab lower out. And then grab our joint editor, right click, edit, adjust rigging to shape, uncheck all, check from scene selection. And I want all of that. I want everything here. This is all good. Hit accept. Let that chug for just a minute. There we go. Now let's grab the currently used on G3 female. Right click on alien torso 2. Go to ERC freeze. We'll freeze all of that. So now that all moves. And I believe that should be all. Oh, the eyes. Those eyes all need some special rigging. Definitely have to remember the eyes. So we want to grab all of the head joints because there's actually a lot of small little joints inside the head. If we go into our scene tab with everything showing, you can see there's an entire set of joints for rigging inside the face. So let's go through and select an eye morph, and then select the head and all of its children. Edit with the joint editor. Uncheck all. Check from scene selection. Scroll to be sure. There it all is. Bingo. Okay, you can see everything snap into place. That's good. So now currently used, alien eyes, ERC freeze, accept it. And to check it, we can just click on those eyes, and there we see that works just fine. So we're going to repeat that process for the other eyes. Let's do alien eyes 2. I love that one. That one is just freaky deaky. And then again, I'm going to grab all the joints of the head, go to my joint editor, edit, adjust rigging to shape, uncheck, then check from scene selection. There we go. Hit accept. And then let's go grab our currently used and freeze it. Freeze, freeze, freeze it. Cool. Sweetness. And I think we have one more of these to go. Let's do Alien Eyes 3. I probably would want to do the chin pieces too, although they're so slight that maybe not. Let's do Alien Eyes 3. That one's very subtle, but we still should do it. So let's grab all the head joints, right click, edit, adjust rigging to shape. Again, uncheck all, check from scene selection, scroll to double check, accept, and voila, Bob's your uncle. And so currently used, Alien Eyes 3, ERC freeze, and acceptamundo. Okay. So now I want to put all of these inside some groups that make sense. So for now, let's grab all of these dials and I'll right click and go to set property group, and I'm going to call this actor slash, let's see, what is it? There's a standard for the grouping on this stuff. So actor, people, fantasy, sci-fi. Actor slash people slash fantasy, sci-fi. And then I'm going to call this CGB Alien Creation Kit. So now we go to actor, people, fantasy, sci-fi, CGB Alien Creation Kit, and we have all these tucked under there. Then let's change some of these. Let's see, remove ears, remove nose. I would want to take some time, which I don't want to take the time right now, but in my own time, I'll go through and organize these so they actually fall under things like head, hands, body, so on and so forth. Right now, it's okay to have them all under here, which might actually be okay anyway, since this is really a creation kit. And like, if you wanted to use these to create your own alien, a really cool way to do that would be, let's create a dial in here that I will call presets. Okay, so let's just go down here and say create new property, and I'm going to scroll over to the end of this and add a / presets, and so let's call this Alien Alien Creation Kit preset 1. Okay, and let's set our minimum limit to 0 and our max to 1 and our attribute type to shape. Hit create. So now I'm going to drag that dial. Right now there's nothing linked up with that dial, but let's go through here and do a little sculpting. Sort of sculpting. It's not really sculpting. When you're just moving dials, it's not really sculpting. Sculpting is done to the surface. This is dial manipulation. But what we're going to do is we're going to work with some of these presets. And so let's elongate the head and neck a little bit. Maybe dial up. Let's pick some ears to dial in. Then let's maybe do, oh, I really like that one, but maybe let's do Alien Eyes 3. Give it bigger eyes, and then let's remove the nose. Okay. And let's do Alien Torso 2, because I really dig that one. And elongate the legs, like that. And if we elongate the legs, we also need to pull the hip so that we bring the figure back to where it's standing on the ground. So let's just go in and grab the hip and pull that up. And then let's elongate the arms a bit. And how about, where are we going here? Let's go to hands. Let's bring that into play. Let's bring the alien feet into play. And we can't have an alien without a nice bulbous cranium. So let's really bulb that baby out. And here you see this stuff all combined to create a completely new shape. Okay? And because of the way that this was all created, where all that rigging is linked up, this gives us a very fast way to get this kind of shape that really is kind of cool. You know, you can do a lot of cool stuff with that. So now I'm going to go back to the new parameter dial that I made, right-click that, and hit ERC freeze. And now you should see the hip Y and then all these different morph shapes that we have in here listed. So now if we hit accept on that and I restore the figure, now, boom, we have that character set, that preset dialed in out of all those different variations that we made. So right there, just in this handful of morphs that I created in, what, 30, 40 minutes, you've got the basis for doing a lot of shapes. We could create so many things with this so fast it isn't funny. So there you go. I think that's pretty cool. This gives us a nice toolkit to build from, and I'm going to save that out. So let's restore the figure, and I'm going to save this into the Alien Allure series. And so I will save this as a morph asset. I'm going to put this in my Alien Allure library, and I'm going to call this Alien Morph, or Alien Creation Kit. Yeah, ACK, Alien Creation Kit. And then I'll go inside Genesis 3 Female here, and I'll find under Actor, People, Fantasy Sci-Fi, Alien Creation Kit. And that's going to grab all of those. Now I hit accept, and we now have a morph asset for that. So now that we have that morph asset, we can, if we have that morph asset installed, these dials will show up anytime we load the G3 Female, and we can then dial in whatever shapes we want out of that. All that rigging comes in with those shapes, and we can link to it. So then anyone who has this kit can then load those shapes, or, you know, we could, we'll see. I believe we're going to want to make this redistributable so that really could be used as maybe some kind of a merchant resource or something like that, so that you guys could actually take it and build your own shapes out of it. What I really, I'm leaning towards saying we want to give this away as a freebie, maybe for a limited time, and then everyone who has it, you would then be able to create these new presets. So you'd be able to take the CGBytes Alien Creation Kit and make new presets just by adding new dials there, and not have to even sculpt anything. You could just pull together some dials, and there you go. So there's a few different ways that could work out. This is kind of something that I kind of rolled up onto in the course of doing this today as something that I thought would just be cool. You know, it's just, this is a cool thing to give back to you guys. So I'll flesh this out, and we'll pass this off to Terry and the folks in testing, get this all lined up, and maybe make this available as just a general resource for everybody, because I think this would be some fun stuff for you guys to play with, and lots of cool shapes in there, lots of fun things that you could build new shapes out of. And if you follow what I just showed you about creating a new parameter, you could actually dial up new shapes for yourself. So next week, we're going to go specifically into the development of the Alien Allure kit that you were presented with today as a freebie at CGBytes. There's Alien Allure, and then there's Neptunia, another freebie that Mr. Jason so graciously put together for us, and tossed that out there to go with it. So really excited about that. I'm very happy with the way the Alien Allure kit came out. And just before we go, let me let's just save out. Actually, now that I've got that saved out, let's just load her up so you guys get a glimpse of her live. Okay, so here we go. Here's Alien Allure. Loading, loading, loading. And what's really going to be neat, actually, the first thing that I want to do now that I've got her loaded is just take a look at, I'm really curious to see how that plays with the new Alien Creation Kit that you just watched me build, okay? So this is probably going to be very broken, because the elongation stuff that's tied in with that preset number 1 would really push this in some crazy ways, but actually that's pretty cool. I'm kind of shocked. So right there you go. There's another crazy alien concept right out of the Alien Allure combined with this new stuff. So just crazy how much that you can do with that. Here we could take the Alien Allure. Now I'm fascinated. I want to play a little bit. Let's take Alien Allure and go look at maybe the eyes. I love this one. Oh my God, that's so cool. That's fun. That's some fun stuff right there. So immediately, not only do we have an Alien Creation Kit, but we have, now that right there you see a little bit of conflict with the Alien Allure shape, so we could dial that back just a little bit. But still, here you have a means of really expanding on this concept. So, and I hope this gives you guys some example of just how far you can go. There's so much stuff that we can do here, you know? So much. And I love that the auto fit feature allows this piece of sample clothing that I put together to follow even those morphs we just made with so little effort. That's just great. I'm actually really enjoying this. probably more than I should. So there you guys go. That is both a look at the new Alien Allure kit from CGBytes and a good look at developing morphs and developing and sculpting your shapes on a G3 chassis. Most of this stuff can be transferred to G8, by the way. We mentioned that earlier on. So it's just a look at developing those shapes. Also a good look inside some of the design considerations, things to consider and think about as you're developing alien concepts. I hope you guys have enjoyed this particular session. I think the coming sessions are going to be even more revealing about doing this type of product. It's something that I really enjoy, even though I don't put very many products out like this. Some funny reasons why. Maybe I'll get into that someday. But I rarely actually release products like this. But there's definitely an appetite out there for it in the market. and they can be a lot of fun. I mean, I actually had fun sitting here just kind of playing with these shapes and seeing where it would lead. So I hope you guys will do that on your own too. Play with the shapes, see where they lead you to, create some cool new alien ideas, and you know, pass those back over to Terry and Jason and the folks at CGBytes, and we'll get those out for you. I think it'd be really cool. There's a lot of folks who love that sort of stuff and would love to see more new stuff from all of you. So with that, I actually ran over a little bit today. It's been a while since I ran over my 2-hour mark, but today I was having some fun with it, so I just decided to play it a little bit loose. I want to take a quick look back at the chat, see what folks are talking about, see if there's any questions or comments that I should take a look at. So let's see. Bubba Squid asks, beginner DS question, is there a way to have morph assets on disk not load automatically on a figure? Well, Bubba, if you watch, you'll notice that I always have external libraries set up. And when I'm working on a project like this, I only have the libraries loaded that I want. So if I were to load all of these libraries, then all of those morphs would be available at the same time. They can be on disk and not read at the same time, but that really requires a little bit of manipulation. So like here, I have my default DAZ Studio library, the My DAZ 3D library. And there are some things installed to that, but I actually install as little as possible to that library. At some point, I should probably just do an entire session on data management inside DS, because there are some ways that DS manipulates data that are actually ingenious and really handy, but they're also a little confusing. And if you don't use them right, you can end up polluting various kits that you may have with data from other kits, and it can get kind of sticky. So it's a large topic to get into. Yes, there are ways to do what I think you're talking about, but it's a bit of an explanation for me to get into right now as I'm running out of time. We'll probably try to touch on that in more depth at a later point, maybe even as part of this series, since it is character creation, saving morphs and having those things present. So, you know, that's something I'll put a pin in that and make sure that I'm able to come back to that at a later date. So let's see what else. Colonel Sanders says that's going to be a cool cheerleader for Mecha Soccer. Yeah, that's cool. And you guys, you know, that is still on deck. I had this scheduled, and I really want to make sure that that you guys don't lose your fire for that particular project. I think that's going to be a lot of fun, and that's also part of why I chose to go ahead and think in terms of aliens and all that, because science fiction is just such a huge realm to be in. And I know we have the Mecha Soccer League coming up. That's going to be a lot of fun. So yeah, I think she would be really neat for that, and I would encourage you guys to be thinking in that way, because there's a lot of creative opportunities there. Let's see. Oh, it looks like we have a new person in chat. Jeremy. I'm going to say Terrier, but it could be Terrier. I'm probably mispronouncing your name. Don't hate me for that. You feel free to send me a correction on that at some point. But welcome, Jeremy. Welcome to the group. So, and Jason, yes, this merchant resource kit that we just created is going to be a freebie for next week. So I'll be handing that in to you guys, and we can get that all tested and polished and yada, 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 and ship that out to all the good folks waiting for it. So, all right. So, folks, thanks as always for coming out. We did run over by about a half an hour today, but that's okay. I think it was kind of cool. It was a lot of cool stuff to be going into. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thanks as always to Jason and Terry and the good folks at CGBytes for putting these things together. Hope Hope you guys had a good time and enjoyed everything you saw here. Make some cool stuff, people. Make cool stuff. That's what it's all about. All about. Blah, 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 blah. After 2.5 hours of talking, sometimes your tongue starts to get a little tired. So, anyway, I hopefully will see all of you folks and maybe more back here next week for our next installment, where we dig deeper into specifically the Alien Allure kit that you guys got to put hands on today. So till next time, thanks for coming out. I am Les Garner from 6S1 here for CGBytes. And, thank you guys. Hope you guys have a good time. Make some cool stuff this week. We'll see you around.